What is up, my painting friends? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Stoof. Today I'm showing you guys a quick, colorful Yosemite Valley painting that I made using acrylic paints. So my paint colors I have on the canvas here are titanium white, apricot, cadmium yellow light, orange. Looking up a little bit there we have cadmium red. Next we have magenta, mauve, purple, ultramarine blue, Prussian blue. Then moving down we have raw umber, Prussian green, and black. I'm using a fine round-tipped brush here, and I'm just getting started on my 8" by 10" canvas by starting to sketch out the scene. So I'm looking at my reference photograph and I'm eyeballing where the center of my canvas is, where the center of my photograph is, and then I'm just working from that reference point to try to get the correct angle and size for these mountains. So if any of you have ever been to Tunnel View in Yosemite, it's gorgeous. If you've never been there, then you should go. Definitely do it. It's amazing. And you have this gorgeous view of this valley that was carved out by glaciers. There's Bridal Veil Fall with a waterfall right in view there, and then on the left you have El Capitan, and then in the far distance you can see Half Dome. So what I'm sketching out right now, the farthest we can see in the back is Little Half Dome there, which once you get up and see it up close, it's not little at all. And then I'm just trying to get each of these angles accurate, putting little tiny bits of detail just for specific features that I need to remember to paint. But in general, just trying to get those shapes right and the proper proportions. And this week is actually National Park Week, and usually I try to get outside and go on a hike. It doesn't always end up being in a national park, but I always try to go outside and get inspired by nature during National Park Week. And unfortunately the national parks are mostly closed from coronavirus this week, but the Park Service was doing some virtual National Park Week fun on their Facebook and Instagram, I noticed, so might be joining in on that. But Yosemite is my favorite national park, so I wanted to paint that in honor of National Park Week. So I'm continuing to sketch out the scene here. I watered down my acrylic paint with just water, just so it was a little bit thinner and easier to manage and just make a quick sketch of my mountain ridges here. Once I sketched out the mountains in the background, I started a quick little tree line of our pine trees that are closest in the foreground. We have a valley full of pines, meadows, and other types of trees, but they aren't that detailed until you get really close up. So I just wanted to show that we have some trees up in the foreground. Once I finished the sketch, it was time to mix some colors and start to fill in the sky. So I blended my ultramarine blue with my mauve purple and white, mostly using white paint though, just little dabs of that blue and purple. And I just started to fill in some color for the upper right corner of the sky, going back and forth, getting nice even coverage on the canvas. Next I blended in a little bit of my Prussian blue with the white, and then I put that at the very top of the canvas and started to blend that down until it mixed in with my mauve purple ultramarine blue. Added a little bit more background sky on the left side of the canvas, and I was leaving some empty space where we're going to be placing some nice colorful clouds. I believe this is a sunrise that I'm painting here because Half Dome is in the east side of the valley. So I'm starting with the area where the sun is the brightest by mixing white with my yellow, and I'm just placing that in that tiny little corner at the edge of our mountain line where that meets the sky. So it's kind of our horizon line, but it's where the land meets the sky. Then I blended in some orange to my color that I already had mixed, and I'm just adding that layer right over top of that white plus yellow mixture, and I'm carrying that up almost to the point of where my blue sky is, but I'm starting to blend some mauve purple in with that orange color that I just had, and that gives me that like light filtering color. You've seen it before in the sky, I'm sure. It's hard to explain what it is, but it's just it's cooling it down, and it's making it more brown looking to give more drama to the bright part of the sky. So I blended that in. I wanted to have that, not a perfectly smooth transition, but you know, you can still see a couple little streaks there, but it's not super chunky. Like, I did brush some of the paint off before blending that in so it could get a little bit of a smooth blend. Now I added a little more orange, and I started to add a couple little spots where we have some clouds there. That orange is where the sun is illuminating the bottom part of the cloud. Then we have a couple little highlights on the cloud, just adding a little bit of white and yellow back into my color. I'm very lightly holding the brush here at an angle so that I can get a nice little swoop of paint to create that cloud look. Then I'm touching up that bright part again and brightening up other little parts of the sky. Now I'm starting to add the highlight color for my clouds. The sun is illuminating the bottom part of these clouds, and then the top part of the cloud is more of a shadow with more purple in it, and the bottom part has more warm orange, yellows, and pinks. So I'm just getting that warm yellow, which isn't too different from the sky color as it looks right now, but then we'll start to build on that. Adding a little more white to brighten that up and differentiate from the sky. Taking a little more orange, blending that in, and now I'm starting to take the clouds into a more saturated, less bright color. Here I blended mauve purple with ultramarine blue, and a little bit of white in there as well, and this color is darker than our background sky and much more purple, as you can see. And I'm just starting with that shadow and taking it right up against our highlight in the clouds. As you can see there, it's blending in a little bit with the paint that was already on the canvas, and that's okay. We can always tone that down later. Adding more blue as we get farther to the left and right sides of the canvas, things cool down and are getting a little bit darker, so I'm continuing to add more blue as we move farther from the center of the canvas. Mixing in a little bit of magenta and making the bottom part of that cloud more of a purple pink. And adding a little more of that color to the central part of my cloud. So for now I'm just getting that color on the canvas. As you can see, the way I'm manipulating the brush is kind of chaotic. I'm not trying to perfectly make brush strokes that are going to give me very detailed, intricate lines. I'm kind of just brushing that brush all over the canvas and giving more of a puffy cloud look by doing that. There I just blended in some warm colors to give a transition between the highlight and that shadow. Just starting to brush that in over top of some of the shadows. And I'm carrying that color over into the left side of the clouds, mixing in more magenta and red, a little bit of ultramarine blue and purple when I want to start to cool it back down to the shadow color. You can see the way I'm moving my brush is still pretty chaotic, just kind of pushing the paint around and not putting it down perfectly, just letting it kind of work its way and give a little bit of sense of movement and wispiness like we see in the clouds. And again, adding more ultramarine blue as we move over to the left side of the canvas. So the clouds are starting to take form here. You can kind of tell what's going on at this point. I'm going to continue to build up the detail a little bit. So we have a couple little shadows in that bottom section under our big cloud closest to us. Adding a little brown with my cadmium red and my orange and apricot. Working here on creating a little shadow ray, so we have light coming up in the sky there, and this is a shadow that was created from the cloud just under it. Then I'm building up some more highlights where the sun is illuminating parts of that cloud at the top of the canvas. Just taking some orange and white, getting the excess paint off my brush, and then starting to blend that in slightly so we don't have those sharp lines. Here I mix magenta with my cadmium red, add a little bit of white. That gives me that nice pink color. It's a nice transition color after you have your highlight. Some parts of the clouds are illuminated with that more reddish pink color. Here I'm blending some orange in with that color I already had. And just further boosting that contact between the cloud and the sunrise at the bottom of the sky. Again, going back to my mauve purple, building up those shadows again, because now it feels like the highlights took over and we don't really have that depth that I want in these clouds, so I'm building up the depth by adding more shadows and creating more contrast. Adding some more ultramarine blue. Add some Prussian blue and some raw umber to that mixture on the palette, and I start to fill that in the next section of ridgeline that we see moving closer to the viewer, and that is going to have a little more saturation than the one behind it, and it's going to have a little more blue, bringing us closer to the green and yellow value. And I'm just trying to get that ridge line painted first. Then I start to go in with the brush and just fill up that space all the way down to the valley, where I add a little bit of white in there and a little hint of green and some more Prussian blue, and just blend that in. Next, I blended some ultramarine blue with raw umber, mauve purple, a hint of magenta, and some white, and just use that as a base for the El Capitan. Just very carefully getting that ridge line accurate, and then blocking in the rest with that base color, adding a hint more Prussian blue, the raw umber, hints of orange and red, a little more ultramarine. Just trying to darken the ridge so that it separates from the clouds. It should be darker than the clouds above it. And once I separated that ridge line from the clouds, I started to mix some white in at the base and work that up, just blending it up into that other color. And this is a sheer granite cliff, so we don't have a lot of vegetation on here, so we don't have a lot of dark blues absorbed by the trees, or bouncing off of the trees. So we have a lot of cool gray blues that we're seeing, and like the lighter, very, very unsaturated color. So we don't have a lot of that dark blue and green on El Capitan. Next, I'm moving to the ridge right behind El Capitan, and I'm adding that warm hue right where the sun is peeking through, just to show that the sun is casting a little bit of light off of those mountains, and we are warming a bit of the mountains up in that area. I'm taking some of my cool blue purple shade, and I'm working that in to cover up that warmer section in the area that's not right along the edge where the sun would be warming it up. Now I'm taking some Prussian at the base where we do have some trees, and just drawing that color down into the valley where we have lots and lots of trees, just filling that color in. Using a U shape because that's the shape of the valley. From an elevation standpoint, when the glacier moves through, it carves out a nice U shape in the valley. Taking a little bit of white and warming that up in a couple little spots. Now I'm blending brown, magenta, little hint of mauve, and I'm working on the next ridge line, moving closer. And here we have Bridal Veil Fall and the cathedral spires, or the cathedral peaks maybe. I'm a little fuzzy on this, but there are these three peaks there. I'm not sure if it's the Three Brothers or if it's the cathedral peaks, but those are the peaks there behind Bridal Veil Fall, and they're a little warmer. We're moving closer. We're starting to see a little bit of the browns, and the very top of that ridge does have more mauve purple, and then I start to blend a little more blue in there as things are cooling down. Moving farther down the slope, we start to get a little bit of pine trees in there as well, so we do have some more shadow colors in there. Once I get that ridge line looking accurate, blending a little bit of white in there to show the parts of the rock that are just exposed granite. And then mixing my Prussian with black and raw umber and green, and that is going to give me the shadowy color for where we have some trees. If you guys want to brush up on your glacial terminology, that Bridal Veil Fall there is a waterfall in a hanging valley, so there used to be a little mini glacier in that valley that would feed into the main glacier that was Yosemite Valley, and then now that glacier valley turned into a waterfall. So there's a river there now that leads into Bridal Veil Fall. I think one of the trickiest aspects of this painting is going to be getting the proper color value to separate these ridge lines in an accurate way. You definitely don't want to start too dark with your color when you're starting with Half Dome in the far background. Try to start with a lighter, less saturated color, and then move as you're moving closer to the front. Make sure each ridge line is getting more saturated and a little bit having a little more contrast. Some sections of the rock have a little bit of warmth to them, but for the most part, the exposed granite is a cool gray-blue. And then wherever we have some vegetation, it gets more of a Prussian blue, ultramarine blue, raw umber, and green. I'm continuing to block in that color right around Bridal Veil Fall. It's a little bit darker right around the waterfall, probably from the granite becoming wet and some lichen growing on there. So that was a little bit of a darker color there. Then we have a little bit of trees to the right of Bridal Veil Fall, and our trees are growing from that point down into the valley. Still keeping that soft U shape, that curve, as I'm continuing the trees down to the valley. Now I'm taking some Prussian blue, some sap green, some raw umber, a little more raw umber, and a little more Prussian blue, just cooling that down. And this is going to make a nice shadow color for my trees. This ridgeline up close has lots of vegetation on it, and it's closer to us, so it's going to appear bigger. It's going to have a little bit more detail. We're going to start to see some of the bushes on the edge of that ridge line. For now, I'm just filling that whole ridge line in with that cool color I just created, and then I'll go back and I'll add some cool beige for sections where we have exposed rock. Taking just some green here and blending that in with the other color I had for the valley. Things are starting to warm up as they're moving closer to us. Just trying to cover up that white space. Adding more Prussian blue to cool things down and create some shadows. Now I'm blending a little white in with that cool shadowy green color I made, and adding more green and more white as I continue to move closer to the viewer with my trees. There's almost like a little bit of mist in the valley that's making things a little bit less saturated and cooler looking. And the way I'm putting the brush on the canvas is I'm not holding it very lightly. I'm kind of pushing it in there and pushing the paint around. And if you want to intricately create your trees, you can just make some up and down brush strokes like I just did, going across the whole way. Or if you want more of an expressive look like I'm doing here, you can just kind of brush it around, have some vertical, some crooked, just to build up the different trees that we'll have here without getting too attached to the details. If you want to add more shadows into your tree area, you just want to mix brown with your Prussian blue, maybe a hint of the green and a hint of black, and that's going to cool things down for you. So I'm just bringing that shadowy color all the way down to where I initially sketched out that tree line in the foreground. Now I'm just taking some green and just plopping that green on there, and I'm mostly going up and down with the brush, starting to create a little bit of the appearance of limbs by making some diagonal brush strokes, but just trying to get a base color for our trees that are in the foreground. They're going to be the most saturated and have more greens and yellows in them than any of the trees in the background. So here I'm just kind of outlining where we have a pine tree where we can see the individual branches up close. Now to create shadows on these, the paint is still wet, so if you want to let it dry and then go in with the shadows, you can do that. That would give you more of a contrast and more dramatic shadows, which would look more realistic, honestly. But here I was trying to go for time and just doing a fun little study, so I was doing quick little brushwork here and continuing to apply paint on top of wet paint. But as you can see, the dark shadow color is blending in slightly with the green that I put down first. And I'm just kind of making some lines diagonally, not completely covering up the green, but just enough to create the look of some shadows. Since our light source is far in the background, our shadows are going to be closest to us, and that's why I did the highlight first and then the shadow on the trees. Now I'm going to go back. Well, now I'm going to do some rocks on that ridge on the left side, and that's a quick little spot. We don't have too many rocks visible there, just a couple spots where there might be some boulders, little rock falls that had occurred. And then I just go right back over that with some of my cool vegetation color. And now I'm mixing some yellow and some more green. It's a little bit of white. And here we're ready to do some highlights on the trees in the foreground. So most of the light is on the back side of these trees, but we do have a little bit of light on the front of them just to give that tree a round appearance so it doesn't look flat. I'm building up that highlight. And if it helps you to paint a straight line for the trunk of each of these trees first, you can definitely do that just so you know where your trees are. And you aren't just putting random highlights all over the place without knowing where your trees are going to be. And then you can kind of cover up that black line if you end up painting that black trunk line in. I'm holding the brush very lightly here because I don't want this highlight to blend in too much with the underlying shadows. So I'm just lightly dabbing that highlight color. It is blending a little bit, but giving me that nice highlight effect. Then in the foreground, on the bottom right, we have some bushes that are a cooler sage green color, and I think that this is something I would have fixed later on. I would have added a little more ultramarine blue to this color because I don't think it stood out enough from the trees behind it. So if you create this painting and you want those bushes in the foreground to clearly be very different from the trees behind them, then add some more blue. Getting the excess paint off my brush and just starting to add some little highlights where we can see some tippy tops of trees. By doing these little up and down brush strokes, it gives us the appearance of tiny little trees, and these little brush strokes are getting smaller and smaller and closer together as we're moving farther back into the valley. And I don't know if you guys noticed, but I used the exact same paintbrush for this entire painting, so you could achieve this look using one fine-tipped round brush. But if you want to go into more detail, take more time with it, you're welcome to do that. Using a flat tip brush would be great for this part right here where I'm painting in the light from the waterfall. When you're painting your waterfall, you want to mix in some ultramarine blue with your white, maybe a hint of mauve. You don't want to paint a pure white waterfall because it's a little cool, and being that far in the distance, and that is just about it, guys. I just tweaked the sky a little, and then I call this a finished painting. You're welcome to go into as much detail as you'd like, or keep it as expressive as this piece here. This is more of an impressionistic style piece for me with those quick brush strokes and the very vibrant colors. This isn't my usual style, but I had a lot of fun creating this, and I was inspired by National Park Week, so I hope you guys enjoyed watching. I also just started a Patreon page for my painting tutorials. I'm going to be putting some exclusive painting tutorials on my Patreon page, so make sure you guys check that out. I'll leave a link for that in the description. Have a great day and happy painting. Bye bye!